All right, welcome back to Keystone Outreach. This is topic 4, video 5. And for this one, we're going to discuss some of the elements of the Revelation, and particularly the likely identity of a couple of the key players in the Revelation, the beast and the woman sitting astride the beast, and what that really means in historical context. So let's jump right into it. First off, the beast. What is the beast? Pop culture gives you some completely misleading information about the nature of the beast. What we do know is that we're told that at some point the beast will, quote, ascend from the abyss and go into perdition. Ascend from the abyss. Well, this tells us what the beast is. And we'll circle back around on this with some other information to reinforce this concept. But the abyss is not hell. The pit, the abyss, Abaddon, Tartaros, they're all the same thing. To the ancient Hebrews, hell was Sheol. It was a very different thing from the Hellenistic hell. The Greek concept of hell as the waiting place of the dead. Well, I guess that's actually the place where they were similar, is that it is the place where the dead go. In the Old Testament, you'll find Sheol mentioned a few times, and it's not a place of fire and torment. It's not where Satan lives. Rather, it's described as sort of a dreary waiting place where, and this is predicated on older Sumerian and Akkadian concepts of hell, of what happens when you die. Back then, before we had the prophets this color is all. I'll tell you what, we are not Joel Osteen here. No production value. Don't arrive in a Rolls Royce. No hairstylist or makeup, and nobody to check and make sure that my collar's not sticking out. So Sheol is just a dreary waiting place. But before there was a concept of exactly what our fate is. We knew from earliest times, certainly Noah and his sons knew that there was a messianic promise, and we know that they knew it because Adam knew it. So that there was going to be redemption at some point. But in the meantime, there was a point where mankind sort of, whether we lost faith in that concept or just let it drift out of our consciousness, for at least a couple of thousand years, people believed that when you died, you went to some dreary waiting place, not fire, not torment, not hell, just this place where you were what was referred to as a shade. And you were in a semi-rest, not really aware. That's the concept of hell in the Old Testament. Sheol is the word. Now, there's a completely different thing called the abyss, and we know a few things about the abyss, and we know it both from Scripture and also from some of the parallel cultures, including the Greeks. The abyss was a place of consignment for, however you want to characterize them, non-humans, spiritual beings, I guess, or the servants of God. And certainly a lot of times in their depictions, especially in the Old Testament, his messengers who came down certainly seemed to be like flesh and blood. They certainly had superhuman capabilities. But some of them, for example, the ones who came to let Abraham know that Sodom and Gomorrah were going to be destroyed, and then he sent them on to Lot to get Lot out. And they seem like regular people. There was no indication that they were anything other than like seemingly regular people. Other times, you have encounters like Daniel's encounter at the river Kebar, which is actually not a river. Kebar was actually a canal, like an irrigation canal that supplied water to ancient Babylon. But there's the episode where he meets with this terrifying being that's apparently one of the Tsar, what we would in the Catholic Church they call the seraphim, but it comes from the Old Hebrew sar, which meant prince or captain. It's the same term that's used to refer to what we call the Archangel Michael. So if you see sar, that's what fits our concept of archangel. It's something above just the regular angelos or malachim, the Old Testament messengers. And his vision of this being is just terrifying. He's like flaming and looks like gemstones and metal and it was so terrifying that even though he was the only person who saw him, everyone else was just filled with terror and fled, and he himself was so terrified he just collapsed basically, and until he was touched and told to rise, he was just too terrified to move. So there's a range of it's kind of hard to characterize these guys because there's a whole range of sort of what they look like and what they can do and that sort of thing. But whatever the case, for the non-humans, for God's non-mortal servants, including the fallen, the place of consignment when they fell into error was the abyss. To the Greeks, Tartaros was the abyss, and it was a place where their pagan gods were consigned. If they got out of hand or whatever, their place, their equivalent of our Sheol, was Tartaros. We see it again in the New Testament when Christ encounters the demoniac, the possessed guy, and the demons in the possessed guy say, we know who you are. Have you come to consign us to the abyss before our time? So whatever the beast is, we're told that he would ascend from the abyss and go into perdition. Again, I don't know about you. I'll work on the assumption that if it's information we're given in the Bible, it's information we should be able to do something with. It's not just random stuff. If there's an identifier like that, it helps us to identify who or what or when or whatever it is we need to know. So this isn't just an angelic type being. This is one who has fallen. Well, as you might guess from the fact that it's the beast, but so it's no mystery there. But it's one that not only is a fallen entity, but one that has been consigned to the abyss. That's pretty significant. So this is it's a key element to understanding who and what the beast is. Now, has Satan been consigned to the abyss? Not that we know. Not the high Satan, but we're told that he would be bound at the end of this age, and we're told that he would be loosed again after Christ's millennial reign. But we've been given no indication that the high Satan, Ha-Satan, has been consigned to the abyss. Certainly, he was not consigned to the abyss at the time of Christ's ministry, because we're told he confronted Christ when Christ went off to to meditate on his own, and Satan came and basically offered him the world. So he certainly was not consigned to the abyss at that time. So the beast is not the dragon. Now the dragon exists, and we know that that's Satan, and Satan, we also know, remains active. We know that Satan remains active after the time of Christ, because we're told also in the Revelation, where we're told about Israel, the woman with the crown of 12 stars, who's ultimately given refuge in her place prepared, that she's pursued and persecuted by the serpent or the dragon, which are kind of interchangeable. So we know that Satan would go on and continue to persecute the remnant of Israel on through the period between John's revelation and the return of Christ. So it's not Satan. The beast is not the dragon. The beast is something else. What is the beast? Well, we're told something kind of interesting, that when the beast is described as having 7 heads, and the 7 heads are given multiple meanings, incidentally, because the Revelation, I don't know how many of you have keyed on this or understood it, but as you read through, it's not sequential. It's a gestaltic book. So it's as if John, as he's being given the visions, is kind of looking around. He looks over here and sees one thing. He looks over here and he sees something else. He looks back here and he sees another aspect of something he's already seen, which is why you have a lot of repetition of, for example, the vials and the seals. These aren't different things. These are different ways of describing what the same 7 things are, seen from different perspectives. So, similarly, when we're told about the beast, so there are 7 heads, but what we're told is that the beast itself, there is that it's of these 7 heads, but is itself the 8th. Now, that's an odd thing to say, right? There are 7 that have gone before, and this is the 8th, but is of the 7. So what can the 7 heads be? A lot of scholars actually agree, and you can do your own research into this, but that the 7 heads represent 7 kingdoms or empires, pagan or anti-God, anti-Christian empires that prevailed against Israel. So, who are they? And we're told that it's 7 kingdoms, and that 5 had come and gone. 1 was present at the time, and then 1 would not come until later, and would only last for, quote, a short space. So who are they? Who are these kingdoms? And why is this important that we know? How does this help us with the identity of the beast? So if we take them chronologically, we know who the empires are that prevailed against Israel. The first was Egypt, which took Israel into captivity and held Israel in captivity. Once the Israelites freed themselves from Egypt, they were pretty much uncontested for a long time. They had wars with other people, but they were never conquered. They had their fits with the Philistines, but they were never conquered. So they weren't conquered again until Assyria, the Assyrian Empire. And that's when most of Judah was decimated, everything but the walled city of Jerusalem, and all of Israel, Samaria, was taken away into captivity. After that happened, the Chaldean, Babylonian, the Neo-Babylonian Empire rose under Nebuchadnezzar. And it went down and crushed what was left of Judah, which had actually reconstituted quite a bit. but destroyed the remnant. And so that's the third. The fourth is the Medo-Persian Empire, which, although it came through and conquered conquered the Babylonians, ultimately leading to some degree of liberation of the Israelites. Still, nevertheless, the Israelites, the freed, and these were mostly Jews in Babylonian exile, but they were still subjects of the Persian Empire. And while the early Persian Empire felt some kinship to the Hebrews, while it was still faithful to Zoroastrianism, the later empire became rapidly paganized with the pagan mystery religion. After taking over Babylon, Babylon is just like a bad penny, corrupted so many people with these pagan mysteries, so the religion changed, and it gradually morphed into Mithraism, which was actually the largest religion in the world in early Rome, even at the time of Christ, and continued to be so for hundreds of years after the crucifixion of Christ and the creation of the church. So Persia, the Medo-Persian Empire, was four. The fifth was the Macedonian Greeks, the armies of Alexander. They're great. And the Holy Land actually fell to the Seleucid part of the empire, which was the empire after the death of Alexander was divided up among his generals, and Seleucus was the general who had everything from Syria on south. Ptolemy, for example, his heirs lorded over Egypt all the way down to Cleopatra, was the last of the Ptolemies. But anyway, so the Macedonian Greek Empire, that's five. So those are the five that were. The one that was at the time of Christ is obvious. It's blatantly obvious. That's the Roman Empire. Doesn't take any guessing. The Roman Empire was the principal persecutor of both the Jews and the Christians. So that's the one that was. What's the one that was to come and would only last for a short space? Well, most likely, I think it's fairly evident that the attempt to resurrect this, including a lot of the holy symbols of the early anti-God and anti-Hebrew religions, were the swastika and those kind of symbols. And I think it's pretty clear that the Third Reich was that short space empire that really, really persecuted real Christians and the Jews, certainly. I mean, we know about the Holocaust. So almost certainly that's the seventh. But the beast is the eighth, but is of the seven, and ascends out of the abyss. So what does that tell us? He's one of the previous seven. So the guiding force, or the god or something of one of these empires, and that has been consigned to the abyss, and that has then ascended from the abyss and returned, to go into perdition. Really, really unhappy about having been consigned to the abyss and looking for revenge and just ready to dole out all the hate and misery possible. So what do we know? Which of these has been consigned to the abyss? Now, interestingly, ancient writings give us the names of, Rahab, for example, was considered to be like the angel of Egypt, or the prince, the Tsar of Egypt. They're actually specific of these Tsars or seraphs that were assigned to these various countries or empires. But there's one that's of particular significance because it's the one who gets specific mention in Scripture, and that is the Prince of Persia. And so we go back to Daniel's episode at the Kabar channel. That's Chebar if you want to look it up. Where he sees this incredible seraph, but it's an odd exchange. So the angel, the seraph, is telling him that presumably a seraph. Now he doesn't identify himself as such, but the other beings he's talking about are he describes as Tsars, the great Tsar Michael, and the Tsar of Persia is actually what he calls this other being. But the exchange is odd because he tells Daniel that, so Daniel had apparently been praying to God for an answer to something, and we never find out what it is because this messenger doesn't tell him that. Instead, what he tells him is, you're a man beloved, and on the day that you asked for this answer, I was dispatched, but the Prince of Persia withstood me for, I think it's 23 days. So in his attempt to get to Daniel to bring him this answer that Daniel is requesting or requiring, this other being, the Prince of Persia, the Tsar, Archangel, whatever, of Persia, blocked him from coming. So he tells Daniel, look, I'm sorry I didn't, I didn't get to you when I was supposed to, but we're going back to engage this Prince of Persia, and the great prince, or Tsar is the word that's used, Michael, we know as the Archangel Michael, is heading there to do battle. Well, there's only one reason that the Archangel Michael would ever be sent anywhere, and that's to take somebody or something down. And as it happens, so that's where it leaves off in the canonized text, is that there's this Prince of Persia that some of the spookiest looking messengers of God are going to engage in battle. It's a very, very odd little standalone vignette. And we never hear the rest in the canonized text. But as it happens, there are a lot of writings in after a lot of the Jews dispersed from Judea after the Judean revolts. A lot of them, there was a large community in Alexandria, and we have a lot of the writings that did not get preserved with the canonized texts that nevertheless ended up either fragmentary or complete in places like Alexandria. And one of the things, one of the stories they tell is about this Prince of Persia. And interestingly, the name that they assign to him is Thartharoth, which is a Hebraicized version of the Greek Tartaros, which again is the abyss. So they have come to identify him. Now, just as all the other angels are given names like Gabriel and Michael, and they all end with the L, Mikael, Gabriel, etc. So was there previously a name assigned to this Prince of Persia, which was Dubiel. And yet, by the time the Hebrews are writing in their exile in Alexandria, they're referring to him as Thartharoth, which is, again, that's a Hebraicized version of the Greek Tartaros, which is the word for the abyss. So the story is that in this confrontation, that this Prince of Persia, and it doesn't explain what he had done to get so out of hand, but he was cast down and consigned to the abyss. And that's why, I mean, you've heard, there's been a movie called Prince of Persia. There's a video game called Prince of Persia. They didn't just come up with this Prince of Persia out of thin air. Prince of Persia is throughout history, um, as this powerful sort of tribal deity or angelic being, is well known in antiquity. It's a very common, I don't want to say myth, because it's, again, he's discussed in the Bible. So it's a common story to lots of different cultures. So the Prince of Persia was cast down and consigned to the abyss. So what do we know about Persia and its religion, and these, because these are important things to know if we think that this is who it is, right? So as I had mentioned in one of the earlier videos, when Israel, Samaria, was at its nadir, and ultimately carried away into captivity by the Assyrians, and Judah wasn't doing much better, only to be carried away a little bit later by the Babylonians. This prophet rose in Persia, Zarathustra, and preached this, identical. They consider themselves to be of the same faith as the Hebrews, but they did have some. He had some slightly different stuff that was revealed to him. But it's pretty interesting reading and seems pretty authentic. So while Israel and Judah were in captivity for a little while, the Persians had to carry the light. But then something happened. They became the faith became Babylonized, and so in the original Zoroastrian faith, like in the Bible, there was a prohibition against any depiction of God. There was also a prohibition against saying the name of God, and that's where we get, like, it's funny, the what we call the Tetragrammaton, the JHVH that we translate to Jehovah. It's not a name. That's a Yod Heth Vaheth is the I am that I am, which is kind of a rebuke when the Israelites demanded that Moses find out what name to call their God by, and he was like, "You tell them I am that I am. I'm self-evident." So what they did is they abbreviated that into the Tetragrammaton. The actual name of God was ineffable. Nobody was supposed to know it, and if you knew it, you weren't supposed to say it. And they carried this tradition in Zoroastrianism. And so the title that they ascribed to God, so they could call him something, was Ahura Mazda, which means light of wisdom. But as the faith became corrupted with Babylon, became paganized, and got corrupted with the pagan mystery religions, and we'll touch on these mystery religions again in just a little bit later in this one. Don't want to go too long, but important stuff. There was you were absolutely forbidden from any depiction of God, any naming of a name of God. Well, what happened is, as time went on, the Ahura Mazda, which was a title, light of wisdom, got slurred into a proper name, or Mazd, as though that's the name. But something more disturbing happened, which is that the Persians began to depict God. And more disturbing yet is that the depiction was this problematic pagan, deity, or God, lowercase g, that was an early chief deity of the Sumerians in their polytheistic religion, and was also then, after being sort of chased out of the Mesopotamian valley by the Marduk Baal faith, and the chief god, prior to the rise of Marduk Baal, which is also Amun-Ra in Egypt, Enlil was the name of this deity, and he had this very And if you see the depiction, you'll probably recognize it because it turns up again and again in different religions. But he was, it was actually the basis for Jupiter, Yah Piter, which is Yah, just like Jehovah, right? God, Piter, P-I-T-E-R, Piter, is where Jupiter comes from. But the concept of the God with the thunderbolt, the God of thunder kind of thing, comes from Enlil. And he was shown, so he was always depicted riding this flying disc, this winged disc, with this specific pose. And he had this a couple of devices, this one little rod thing with a device that we don't know what that was supposed to be in one hand, and then with his arm cocked back with what was called the thunderbolt. But the thunderbolt it wasn't like lightning and thunder. It's kind of a football shaped thing that's got this one wire that comes through and wraps around and comes out the other, comes in low, wraps around and comes out high. And then from the other side, one comes in low here, wraps around and comes out high on the other side. It's a very specific device, the thunderbolt. And it's the exact same depiction for Enlil. And then once he was deposed as this chief deity in Sumer, the Sumerian city-states, he turns up in Assyria as Ashur, and that's where Assyria gets its name, is from its god Ashur. But ultimately, Ashur gets crushed by the worshippers of Marduk, Baal, in the form of the Chaldean Babylonians, the Neo-Babylonian Empire. So he's displaced again. So where does he turn up next? He turns up replacing Ahura Mazda. And it's the depiction of Ormazd is exactly the same depiction. You can look them up. Ormazd, Enlil, Ashur. Same exact depiction. So he turns up, but the difference is, this time around, what did he do? At this point in time, the Persians were worshiping the true God. Ahura Mazda, they're talking about the Hebrew God. So when he comes in to try to steal somebody else's worship this time, he's messing with the real God. So, I feel pretty confident that that's what caused Michael and whoever this other guy was that came to see Daniel and this whole other host to go and consign him to the abyss. It's one thing to try to stake out your little spot, but you don't pretend to be God. Even Satan doesn't overtly do that. So that's what got the Prince of Persia cast down. So let's step aside for a moment from the Prince of Persia. And so let's just say, for the sake of argument, that this beast that is of the previous seven and is itself the eighth, that the one of the seven that it was the Prince of Persia, and that is who and what's coming back as the beast. Now, there's a woman sitting astride the beast. We're all familiar with that one. She's arrayed in scarlet and purple. But there's something interesting. Her on her forehead is written Mystery Babylon and Mother of Harlots, etc., etc. Right? Mystery Babylon. When it says Mystery Babylon, it's not talking about the Babylonian Empire. That's Babylon the Great or the Babylonian Empire. Mystery Babylon is the religion of Babylon that corrupted nation after nation, called the pagan mysteries. The reason they're called mysteries, and they're carried on in secret society. It's carried on in a sense in secret societies today. The concept of a mystery faith, and certainly a lot of the Egyptian cults were mystery religions as well, which is why only the Pharaoh and his immediate court had access early on to the Book of the Dead, for example. The whole idea of a mystery religion, where the term comes from, is that the purpose of the faith is supposed to be to reveal. So when you're an apprentice or a novice, you come in to be trained by an adept. So it's the way that you achieve self-perfection or enlightenment is by coming in as an adept, or sorry, as a novice. You submit to the will of your assigned master, who is an adept, and they walk you through various things, and there's all sorts of weird, depending on which sect you're talking about. There can be all sorts of weird tenets and weird things that you have to do that are supposed to gradually enlighten you to these hidden mysteries. So that's a characteristic of the worship of Marduk Baal, for example. The later worship of Ormazd, and then after Ormazd, the Prince of Persia got stricken down, and he did. I mean, there's no question that this deity who was depicted, with the thunderbolt and everything, about midway, towards the end of the Persian Empire, before Alexander's armies took them down, suddenly they had this shift, and certainly it was after the casting down of the Prince of Persia that they shifted. Then they reverted to, there was this lesser tribal god called Mithras, who was the bull slayer, and there were all these depictions of him, like kneeling over. He's got the bull down. He's stabbing his sword into it. The bull slayer, and this was an old Bronze Age deity, and they referred back, or they kind of reverted back to this tribal deity and created this Mithraism. But it included all these elements of it still carried on all these elements of the Babylonian mysteries. And Mithraism became, for a time, and when I say for a time, we're talking about centuries, the most pervasive religion in the known world. And as a matter of fact, a lot of the tenets of the Church of Rome are predicated in Mithraism. That's where we get things like the Yule log. That's where we get the lighting of the candles, the perpetual flame, stuff like that. But there are a lot of tenets. The whole in the Catholic procession, where they carry in the monstrance, the solar ray disc that they place the little wafer, the communion wafer in, that comes straight out of Mithraism, because there were a few different deities included in this, but the big one was Saturnus. But Saturnus is this strange concept. It's an alternate sun, and we don't have enough time to go into that. But it's an alternate sun, and it's talked about. Nobody knows what astronomical event happened sometime in antiquity to give these guys this concept of a second sun, but Saturnus is it. And they weren't talking about the planet we call Saturn now with the rings. This was something else that was radiant and was in the sky for a long time. But anyway, the solar rays that we have in the monstrance, and with the wafer, and that wafer comes from the Ishtar Tammuz cult and the Tammuz worship, and the Bible talks about it in the Old Testament. The Israelite women are decried for baking the little cakes to Tammuz and weeping for Tammuz. So that's where the communion wafer, as opposed to just bread and wine in remembrance of Christ, that's how that comes in. But anyway, I digress, as I'm wont to do. but so Mithraism became, it carried on, but for some inexplicable reason, it was basically the same faith. It's just that Ormazd just disappears, replaced by this older tribal deity, Mithras. So that's the Persia angle, and we'll circle back to that. But Mithraism informed so many of the pagan traditions of Catholicism that having this Scarlet woman, arrayed in scarlet and purple, which is, come on guys, it's the Vatican colors, scarlet and purple, And if you look at any assembly of the cardinals, and there it is, arrayed in scarlet and purple, with all these, all the gold and stuff. Which, go to Vatican City and take a look. And seated on 7 hills. The 7 hills of Rome. There's no question. There's later, after Rome, there became a little bit of a tradition of sort of assigning randomly, some 7 hills of this place or that place. But the original, place of 7 hills is Rome. And everybody, we learned them when I was in school. What is it? Palatine and I'll think of some of the other ones. But anyway, 7 hills, and everybody know. You go to Rome and you go see the 7 hills. So this Scarlet woman sits on 7 hills. She's the mother of harlots. Now, how's harlotry used? In the Old Testament, when the prophets talk about the Israelites playing the harlot or whoring themselves, what they're talking about is accreting, bringing in pagan traditions, worshiping idols, but falling into paganism. So when you're talking about a harlot, it's not talking about literally a whore. It's talking about a people falling into error, into paganism, and corrupting the faith with pagan tenets. That's what the harlotry of the Bible is. So that's what she is. She's the mother of harlots. Okay. So who is she? Well, it's the Church of Rome. It's pretty clearly the Church of Rome. You've got the colors, you've got the location, and you've got the accretion of all these pagan tenets. And then you've got all the little other denominations that ended up splitting off of Rome, or Roman Catholicism, that still carry most of the errors. But why is she sitting astride the beast? Well, because most of this pagan stuff came directly to the Church of Rome through Mithraism, which was the largest religion all the way up through the time of Constantine, the largest religion in the Roman Empire. And as a matter of fact, there was a subcult of Mithraism called the cult of Sol Invictus, the Invincible Sun. And virtually every Roman legionnaire, that was their official cult, was they worshiped Sol Invictus. That's why their Sabbath is Sunday, because it's the holy day of Sol Invictus. So, but it came to us through Rome from Mithraism, which is again Persia. So there's the tie back to it. It's also interesting, tying back to another of the, just speaking of the mystery religions, the constant perversion of the faith with the pagan mysteries. It's interesting that in the New Testament, just going back to the Saul thing for a moment, Saul, in his epistles, constantly references mysteries over and over again. Christ used the word only once, and he in referencing the mysteries of. He said, "You shall know the mysteries of heaven." One time in all of his teachings did he invoke the term. It gets used by John briefly, actually mainly because of the mystery Babylon on the head of the woman. I think it's used one other place in the Revelation. Other than that, none of the disciples ever invoked the term mystery or mysteries. The only place that it's referenced, and it's throughout Paul's epistles, he's constantly referring to the mysteries as what it is that his ministry is enlightening you to. It's bringing you into the mysteries. And of course, we know that the Church of Rome is, it invokes the mysteries all the time. There are all sorts of these pagan tenets about this or that mystery. When you see mystery, run. That's a bad thing in Scripture. So Mystery Babylon is that's the Babylonized Persian faith, which then gets converted into the Roman faith, which then gets converted into the Catholic faith, and that's how we end up with all this. And interestingly enough, you may or may not know this, but tying Hitler and the Third Reich in as the the seventh beast that reigns only for a short space. The Church of Rome actually had a concordat. That's their. They don't have treaties because they're not a nation, but their equivalent of a treaty is a concordat. And they had a concordat with the Nazis. They had a treaty with them of common purpose. So, kind of ties back in there too. But now, let's talk about. Let's bring this Prince of Persia concept forward. So there's been a Persian cult in existence for a couple of thousand years that pre-existed Islam, and they call it they call their god or their messianic figure the Mahdi, Mahdi, the Mahdi, and once Islam took root, they kind of, rather than convert, they just kind of mixed the Mahdi cult with Islam, and they changed the identity of the Mahdi to something they call the 12th Imam. So that they claimed that the 12th successor to they morphed this Mahdi into this 12th successor of Muhammad. And the story is, see if this sounds familiar. The story is that this is their ultimate Messiah, but that he disappeared down a well, never died, disappeared down a well, and that in the end time would ascend from the well and would bring about the corrected world by bringing this world to the very brink of destruction, of total annihilation. Doesn't it sound like they're talking about their Prince of Persia who disappeared down into the abyss, and who there's a prophecy that he will ascend from the abyss, right? So the Mahdi is this Prince of Persia. And here's the scary thing: is the Muslim cult that is in charge, that runs Persia. All the leadership in Iran today are they're practitioners of the Mahdi cult, and that's why they're so hell bent on getting nuclear weapons. They believe that the only way that they will bring about the return of their Messiah is by bringing the world to the edge of total annihilation. That their prophecy, they use sort of the same prophecy that we have for Armageddon, where all the armies are gathered to do battle, and were it not for their 12th Imam returning, the world would be destroyed. That's also Mithras, and they invoke that name as well. The New Age movement kind of borrowed this concept, and they've seized on this as their Messiah. They call it Maitreya. And there's a sect of Buddhism that had also been contaminated with this whole Mahdi cult. And so they have a Maitreya. And in the Indus Valley, there's also a Maitreya cult. So the Maitreya, and when this New Age movement, kind of peaked back in, I guess it was the late 80s, and then they had taken out full-page ads in newspapers hailing the imminent arrival of Maitreya the Christ. Well, Maitreya the Christ is Mithras. It's just another pronunciation of it, or the Mahdi, or the 12th Imam. It's all the same. But in all of these, they say that he will ascend from a well, whereas John tells us it's this beast ascending from the abyss. So there you have. There you have your. It's actually pretty clear cut, but you have to know. It's important to know comparative theology, to know what other religions, what their traditions are, and that's how you identify these things that the Bible is telling you about. You need to know what these other people are up to so that you recognize the bad guys when they show up. But so we, two of the key players of the Revelation we have pretty clearly identified. The Church of Rome, sitting on her 7 hills of Rome, drunk on the blood of martyrs. Is there a better way to describe the Church of Rome? Arrayed in scarlet and purple. And yet, we're told that before it's all over with, this beast, when he does arise from the abyss, will turn on the woman and burn her with fire. That also perfectly makes sense because Islam hates Christendom. And it doesn't matter one bit to them that a lot of the tenets of Roman Catholicism come from their common faith of Mithraism. Islam hates Christianity. And the Mahdi cult is now ingrained in a whole subcult of Islam. And so it perfectly makes sense that at some point this beast will turn on the Church of Rome or Christendom as it exists, which would, the Church of Rome, you're really just talking about Europe. And there are still, the monarchies are still trying to regain their power. That's what the whole globalism thing is about, is these deposed monarchs during the democracy movements of, a few hundred years ago, or a couple of hundred years ago. Well, they'd never gotten over being deposed, and a lot of them still exist. They've got insane amounts of money stashed in Switzerland. And of course, there are still a lot of these monarchies are still seated, and certainly, the Frankist cabal there in the UK with the royal family there, the artificially created House of Windsor, is right in the thick of it. But so when you're talking about, the woman, sitting astride the beast, you're also talking about things like the British monarchy and a lot of this stuff. Now we know that that the woman with 12 stars, Israel, her place prepared is a place of sanctuary. So, if the Persians, the Iranians ever do get nuclear weapons, they probably won't hit us, but they're certainly going to lash out at the woman and her daughters, because we're told that they will, and it makes sense. That's how you know that you're on the right track with interpreting this prophecy. Is it all makes sense. It's not weird, wacky stuff. It's stuff that makes sense. Now, to you, maybe the idea of some, prince, demigod of a city-state, may not make sense. But if it doesn't, if you don't believe that they existed, then you don't believe the Old Testament, because we are told about this. We're told that they exist. We're told Satan exists. Do you believe Satan is real? Satan has his minions. There are other fallen. We know that. There were demons possessing the guy that Christ drove them off into the herd of swine. So if you don't believe in those things, why are we talking? Why are you even listening to me? Because we're talking about the Bible, and the Bible says that, and it's not allegory, and it's not mythology. It's The Bible is history, and you either believe it or you don't. If you don't believe it, you're not, you're not a Christian, and you might as well just stop and stop worrying about, the wages of sin or anything else. Because if you don't believe, Christ Himself tells us that we struggle against principalities and powers. Principalities. What's a principality? Okay, that's basically a state controlled by a czar. The prince, the term they use for prince that gets translated as prince is czar, seraph. They're a root for seraph, the seraphim. So, we're told specifically that we struggle against principalities and powers. So there they are. I'm identifying them for you. But as I always say, let's invoke the Spirit of Christ while we're here. We're sharing this time, and don't take my word for it. Ask for His enlightenment, and take what I've given you, and go research it yourself. Whether you're just rereading Scripture with this new understanding of what some of these things mean, and tying together these kind of disparate parts of Scripture. It's why it's really important to know the whole of the Bible, right? So, how would you recognize this Prince of Persia if you'd never read the entirety of Daniel and you didn't know about this otherwise, unless it ties to later prophecy? The whole thing with the angel coming and talking to Daniel about he's been withstood by the Prince of Persia is a strange thing that makes no sense at all. It's just this weird little vignette that's non-contextual with anything that's going on. So why do we know it? Why are we told it? If it's in there, there's a reason. If there's a God so powerful as to be able to create us and all that we are, He could certainly manage to get His word to us in His Scripture. And so there it is. But you need to be able to know how these Old Testament things tie into these New Testament things, so that we have understanding. And that's why also, understanding. That's why if you read through the Revelation, you'll notice that there are multiple times where the words that John records are, for he who has understanding, and then we'll explain numerical significance and stuff like that. So there you have it. We'll bounce back to the Revelation at some point, but these are two big characters. Let's see, what have we got? I'm right at an hour. I'll introduce the subject, but we're not going to talk about it yet. The so-called mark of the beast. It's not mark. The word used is charagma, and a charagma, broadly speaking, is a mark made with a charagma, a stylus. It's a way that the Romans used to write, where they would overlay a piece of white linen with a placard with dark sealing wax, and then they would use the stylus to cut. They had those very angular letters. The reason they were angular is because they're easy to chisel out or to mark with a stylus, and they were made of straight intersecting lines. But the term came to mean something else entirely, which is it was a placard that was worn by bondmen, slaves. And slaves, not necessarily in the term that, it was a more all-encompassing term. It could include indentured servants, captives from other, kind of advanced societies who might be, they might serve as an accountant or, metallurgist or something for a wealthy Roman. But if they weren't freemen, if they weren't free Romans, they were bondmen. And they had to carry the placard called a charagma, this placard that identified who their master, who their owner is, so that if they got in any trouble or they were guilty of any tort or broke something in the market that had to be paid for, they had the placard saying who was ultimately responsible for them, and that's who would. So that's who had to make restitution, and then that owner could determine how to deal with the servant who cost him money. But that whole concept, it never went away. It continued to evolve, and we'll cover that. I think that's worth an entire video for itself. We're at the 1 hour mark. That's certainly more than enough. I thank all of you who've listened, and hope you're getting something out of these. And we'll see you next time. Again, this is Keystone Outreach. If you want to send us any questions, keystoneoutreach@gmail.com. All right, until next time.